Okay, so we're going to be doing Chapter 8, Part 3, which is the final part of Chapter 8 in Lord of the Flies. A very, very significantly symbolic chapter in Lord of the Flies. Just to recap, we noticed in the last scene that the scene with Ralph and the scene with Jack is very different. Ralph's scene is still, his group is still very much concerned with the fire, and Jack, of course, is concerned with hunting. Ralph's group is eating a feast of fruit, which is very symbolic, whereas Jack's group is planning to have a feast of meat, this meat that they just hunted. Ralph's group is happy and calm, and Jack's group has acted very violent, torturing the pig. This is still a very much split scene between Ralph and Jack, but don't forget there's also Simon. Where are all these scenes happening? Well, Ralph's scene is happening on the beach where their whole civilization has started. Jack's scene is happening in a place where butterflies dance. I want you to think about where that place is. And Simon is in his special place for meditating, where the candle buds open, which is in fact the same place that Jack is in, the same place that Jack and the hunters violently killed that last pig, where the butterflies danced, which is very, very significant. Okay, our aim for this last scene is twofold. The same question, only about two different characters. What happens when Ralph's scene converges with Jack's? Right, we have these split scenes. Well, what happens when these two scenes come together? And what does Simon see when his scene converges with Jack's? What does he learn from this sight that he sees when these two scenes come together? Okay, so follow along as I read on page 136. This is right, we're picking up right after Jack and the hunters have killed the female pig. And not only do they kill her, but they really torture her. Roger especially doesn't just use his spear to kill her, but finds a different place to put his, a different lodgement, the author tells us, to put his spear, and the boys say, right up her. So we're on page 137. This time, Roger and Maurice acted the two parts. And Maurice's acting of the pig's efforts to avoid the advancing spear was so funny that the boys cried with laughter. At length, even this paled. Jack began to clean his bloody hands on the rock. Then he started work on the sow and paunched her, lugging out the hot bags of colored guts, pushing them out into a pile on the rock while the others watched him. He talked as he worked. We'll take the meat along the beach. I'll go back to the platform and invite them to a feast. That should give us time. Roger spoke. Chief, how can we make fire? Jack squatted back and frowned at the pig. We'll raid them and take fire. There must be 4 of you, Henry and you, Robert and Maurice. We'll put on paint and sneak up. Roger can snatch a branch while I say what I want. The rest of you can get this back to where we were. We'll build the fire there, and after that... He paused and stood up, looking at the shadows under the trees. His voice was lower when he spoke again. But we'll leave part of the kill for... He knelt down and was busy with the knife. The boys crowded round him. He spoke over his shoulder to Roger. Sharpen a stick on both ends. Presently he stood up, holding the dripping sow's head in his hands. Where's that stick? Here. Ram one end in the earth. Oh, it's rock. Jam it in that crack there. Jack held up the head and jammed the soft throat down on the pointed end of the stick, which pierced through into the mouth. He stood back, and the head hung there, a little blood dribbling down the stick. Instinctively the boys drew back too, and the forest was very still. They listened, and the loudest noise was the buzzing of flies over the spilled guts. Jack spoke in a whisper. "Pick up the pig." Maurice and Robert skewered the carcass, lifted the dead weight, and stood ready. In the silence, and standing over the dry blood, they looked suddenly furtive. Jack spoke loudly. "This head is for the beast. It's a gift." The silence accepted the gift and awed them. The head remained there, dim-eyed, grinning faintly, blood blackening between the teeth. All at once they were running away as fast as they could through the forest toward the open beach. Simon stayed where he was, a small brown image concealed by the leaves. Even if he shut his eyes, the sow's head still remained like an after-image. The half-shut eyes were dim with the infinite cynicism of adult life. They assured him that everything was a bad business. "I know that." Simon discovered that he had spoken aloud. He opened his eyes quickly, and there was the head grinning amusedly in the strange daylight, ignoring the flies, the spilled guts, even ignoring the indignity of being spiked on a stick. He looked away, licking his dry lips. A gift for the beast? Might not the beast come for it? The head, he thought, appeared to agree with him. "Run away," said the head silently. "Go back to the others. It was a joke, really. Why should you bother? You were just wrong. That's all. A little headache. Something you ate, perhaps." "Go back, child," said the head silently. Simon looked up, feeling the weight of his wet hair, and gazed at the sky. Up there for once were clouds, great bulging towers that sprouted away over the island, gray and cream and copper-colored. The clouds were sitting on the land. They squeezed, produced moment by moment this close, tormenting heat. Even the butterflies deserted the open space where the obscene thing grinned and dripped. Simon lowered his head, carefully keeping his eyes shut, then sheltered them with his hand. There were no shadows under the trees, but everywhere a pearly stillness, so that what was real seemed elusive and without definition. The pile of guts was a black blob of flies that buzzed like a saw. After a while these flies found Simon. They tickled. Gorged, they alighted by his runnels of sweat and drank. They tickled under his nostrils and played leapfrog on his thighs. They were black and iridescent green and without number. And in front of Simon, the lord of the flies hung on his stick and grinned. At last Simon gave up and looked back, saw the white teeth and dim eyes, the blood, and his gaze was held by that ancient, inescapable recognition. In Simon's right temple, a pulse began to beat from the brain. And now we have a brief, paragraph break, and going back to Ralph's scene. Ralph and Piggy lay in the sand, gazing at the fire and idly flicking pebbles into its smokeless heart. "The branch is gone. Where's Sam and Eric? We ought to get some more wood. We're out of green branches." Ralph sighed and stood up. There were no shadows under the palms of the platform, only the strange light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. High up among the bulging clouds, thunder went off like a gun. "We're going to get buckets of rain." "What about the fire?" Ralph trotted into the forest and returned with a wide spray of gleam that he dumped on the fire. The branch crackled, leaves curled, and the yellow smoke expanded. Piggy made an aimless little pattern in the sand with his fingers. "Trouble is, we haven't got enough people for a fire. You gotta treat Sam and Eric as one turn. They do everything together." "Of course." "Well, that isn't fair. Don't you see? They ought to do 2 turns." Ralph considered this and understood. He was vexed to find how little he thought like a grown-up, and sighed again. The island was getting worse and worse. Piggy looked at the fire. "You'll want another green branch soon." Ralph rolled over. "Piggy, what are we going to do?" "Just have to get on without him." "But the fire." He frowned at the black and white mess in which lay the unburnt end of branches. He tried to formulate, "I'm scared." He saw Piggy look up and blundered on. Not of the beast. I mean, I'm scared of that too. But nobody else understands about the fire. If someone threw you a rope when you were drowning, if a doctor said, take this, because if you don't, you'll die, you would, wouldn't you? I mean, of course I would. Can't they see? Can't they understand? Without the smoke signal, we'll die here. Look at that. A wave of heated air trembled above the ashes, but without a trace of smoke. We can't keep one fire going, and they don't care. And what's more, he looked intensely into Piggy's streaming face. What's more, I don't sometimes. Supposing I got like the others, not caring, what'd become of us? Piggy took off his glasses, deeply troubled. I don't know, Ralph. We've just got to go on, that's all. That's what grown-ups would do. Ralph, having begun the business of unburdening himself, continued, Piggy, what's wrong? Piggy looked at him in astonishment. Do you mean the... No, not it. I mean, what makes things break up like they do? Piggy rubbed his glasses slowly in thought. When he understood how far Ralph had gone toward accepting him, he flushed pinkly with pride. I don't know, Ralph. I expect it's him. Jack? Jack. A taboo was evolving around that word, too. Ralph nodded solemnly. Yes, he said. I suppose it must be. The forest near them burst into uproar. Demonic figures with faces of white and red and green rushed out howling, so the little ones fled screaming. Out of the corner of his eyes, Ralph saw Piggy running. Two figures rushed to the fire, and he prepared to defend himself, but they grabbed half-burnt branches and raced away along the beach. The three others stood still watching Ralph, and he saw the tallest of them, stark naked save for the paint and a belt, was Jack. Ralph had his breath back and spoke. Well? Jack ignored him, lifted his spear, and began to shout. Listen, all of you. Me and my hunters, we're living along the beach by a flat rock. We hunt and feast and have fun. If you want to join my tribe, come and see us. Perhaps I'll let you join, perhaps not. He paused and looked around. He was safe from shame or self-consciousness behind the mask of his paint and could look at each of them in turn. Ralph was kneeling by the remains of the fire like a sprinter in his mark, and his face was half hidden by hair and smut. Sam and Eric peered together around a palm tree at the edge of the forest. A little one howled, creased and crimson by the bathing pool, and Piggy stood on the platform, the white conch gripped in his hands. Tonight we're having a feast. We've killed a pig, and we've got meat. You can come and eat with us if you like. Up in the cloud canyons, the thunder boomed again. Jack and the two anonymous savages with him swayed, looking up, and then recovered. The little one went on howling. Jack was waiting for something. He whispered urgently to the others, Go on now. The two savages murmured. Jack spoke sharply, Go on. The two savages looked at each other, raised their spears together, and spoke in time. The chief has spoken. Then the three of them turned and trotted away. Presently Ralph rose to his feet, looking at the place where the savages had vanished. Sam and Eric came, talking in an awed whisper. I thought it was... and I was scared. Piggy stood above them on the platform, still holding the conch. That was Jack and Maurice and Robert, said Ralph. Aren't they having fun? I thought I was going to have asthma. Sucks to your asthma. When I saw Jack, I was sure he'd go for the conch. Can't think why. The group of boys looked at the white shell with affectionate respect. Piggy placed it in Ralph's hands, and the little ones, seeing the familiar symbol, started to come back. Not here. He turned toward the platform, feeling the need for ritual. First went Ralph, the white conch cradled, then Piggy, very grave, then the twins, then the little ones, and the others. Sit down, all of you. They raided us for fire. They're having fun. But Ralph was puzzled by the shudder that flickered in his brain. There was something he wanted to say. Then the shudder had come down. But They were regarding him gravely, not yet troubled by any doubts about his sufficiency. Ralph pushed the idiot hair out of his eyes and looked at Piggy. "But the fire! Of course, the fire!" He started to laugh and stopped and became fluent instead. "The fire's the most important thing. Without the fire, we can't be rescued. I'd like to put on war paint and be a savage, but we must keep the fire burning. The fire's the most important thing on the island, because He paused again, and the silence became full of doubt and wonder. Piggy whispered urgently, "Rescue! Oh, yes! Without the fire we can't be rescued, so we must stay by the fire and make smoke." When he stopped, no one said anything. After the many brilliant speeches that had been made on this very spot, Ralph's remarks seemed lame, even to the little ones. At last Bill held out his hands for the conch. "Now we can't have fire up there because we can't have fire up there. We need more people to keep it going. Let's go to this feast and tell them the fire's hard for the rest of us. And the hunting and all that, being savages, I mean, it must be jolly good fun." Sam and Eric took the conch. "That must be fun, like Bill says. And he's invited us to a feast. Meat!" Crackling. "I could do with some meat." Ralph held up his hands. "Why shouldn't we get our own meat?" The twins looked at each other. Bill answered, "We don't want to go in the jungle." Ralph grimaced. "He, you know, goes. He's a hunter. They're all hunters. That's different." No one spoke for a moment. Then Piggy muttered to the sands, "Meat." The little ones sat, solemnly thinking of meat and dribbling. Overhead, the cannon boomed again, and the dry palm fronds clattered in a sudden gust of hot wind. Okay, so before we end the chapter, let's think about some of these questions. How does Jack plan to make the fire? What does he do if he doesn't have fire for himself? Why does Jack leave the head of the pig on a stick? And what's the weather in this scene? And why is that significant? What's happening with the weather in this scene? Okay, in our next video, we're going to look at the message of the Lord of the Flies to Simon. So stay tuned for that scene, which is the last scene in chapter